So welcome everybody. Welcome everybody. My name is Mark Haden. This is the third part of our open public education program. And this particular topic, we've dealt with what is addiction, we've dealt with drugs in the body. Now we're going to deal with recovery. We're going to ask a very basic question during this process is what does it mean to recover from the process of addiction? I'm going to start and end this presentation with a poem. And it's they're beautiful poems. I really appreciate them. And the first poem is called Autobiography in 5 short chapters by Portia Nelson. Chapter number 1. I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It isn't my fault. And it takes forever to find a way out. Chapter number 2. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. And it still takes a long time to get out. Chapter number 3. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I fall in. It's a habit. But my eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. And I get out immediately. Chapter number 4. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter number 5. I walk down a different street. Yay. Whew. I think that's beautiful. So I want to explore recovery. And I want to explore what it means to be in the place of recovery. Because it is not simple. When we explored addiction a few sessions back, we explored how it is our humanity that becomes involved with this process of addiction. Addiction is not just about drugs. Addiction is a human experience that we do when we go to the place of addiction in our lives. So in order to understand recovery, we also have to walk the same path together. And the path that we're going to walk is understanding what it means to be human. Because it is our humanity that gets involved with addiction, and it needs to be our humanity that gets involved with recovery. So I'm going to be rather bold here. I'm going to actually define what it means to be human. And I believe while that question has been debated for centuries by philosophers and scientists, I think it is bold to present a solution to that question. And the answer is, to be a human being is to be a thinking, feeling, acting creature that exists in a social, environmental, and spiritual context. Let's go through those words one at a time. Thinking. What does it actually mean to think? For this purpose, I'm going to define thinking quite precisely. Thinking is words and pictures in the mind. It's the internal dialogue that we have with ourselves, that little rambling internal voice, and sometimes we have many voices. That's the thinking process, and we all do it. It's the commentary that we have in our head about what's going on around us. Feeling has to do with body chemistry. For example, anger, sadness, joy, elation, grief are all feelings, and we all have those feelings. So feelings are emotions, and they're about body changes. Sometimes we get really sweaty when we have lots of feelings. Anxiety is about sweatiness. So sometimes it's about heart rate changes. So there's a kind of a physical element to thinking, to the feeling process. Action is what we're doing. What am I doing? I'm standing up here and I'm waving my arms around. So the action process has to do with what we're actually doing with our bodies. Social. We as a human species are actually hardwired to need each other. It is part of who we are as a species. We cannot exist and keep our sanity if we are completely alone in the world. If we go up north into the bush and we trap animals for a long period of time, a couple of months, we come out of that experience and we are bushed. By bushed, I mean the words don't make sense anymore. Our ability to actually pay attention is really, really poor. The solution for bushed is conversation. But it's not any conversation. It's conversation with a sense of closeness with a fellow human being. We need each other. We do. in order to be basically okay in our lives. We have to have connection with at least one fellow human being and conversations with people. Environmental. Where we live, the environment around us reflects who we are. It is the mirror of our lives. And if we are living in a hotel room with a half an inch of cigarette butts on the floor, that will mirror our addiction to us. So who we are is mirrored by the environment we live in. And spiritual. By spiritual, I'm being quite precise here. It's a sense of meaning and purpose to life, with perhaps a sense of awe and mystery. It means essentially when I'm in a place of spirituality, I have a sense that what I am doing is important and has some kind of context that's bigger than just this personality in this body. So we are thinking, feeling, acting creatures that exist in a social, environmental, and spiritual context. Now, each one of these 6 factors of being human changes when we go to the place of addiction. And each one of them needs to change when we go to the place of recovery. So let's explore them one at a time. When we walk the path of addiction, we develop a thinking voice in our head that I call the addictive voice. And essentially, the logic of the addictive voice is actually quite similar with all of us. When we develop an addictive voice, it's actually kind of similar to other people's addictive voice. So it's interesting, when I have somebody in my office that I've never met before, and I talk to them about why they're coming to talk to me about their addiction concerns. And sooner or later in the conversation, I will describe what I'm about to describe to you, which is essentially the addictive voice and its battle that it has with the healthy voice that I'm about to describe. And inevitably, the person who I'm talking to will say, "How did you know? How did you know what I was thinking? Because I've never described this to anybody. How did you know exactly what my internal experience is like?" And the answer to that question is 28 years in the business. We're kind of similar. When we as human beings do this, it's kind of the same for all of us. So let's look at what it actually looks like. When we develop an addictive voice, we develop a voice that is deceptive. And it deceives myself first, and then it expands to deceive others. It will also sacrifice tomorrow for perceived pleasure today. I will convince myself that getting high right now is worth it, and it doesn't matter how sick I feel tomorrow morning. The healthy voice, which is the opposite of that, is exactly the opposite. The healthy voice will put up with distress today for a better tomorrow. I know I don't really want to do this, but you know something? I got to work at this exam or these books, or I got to read this, I got to study this. And it's uncomfortable for me to do it because I know that if I learn this thing, then I'm going to be better tomorrow. So a healthy voice is all about protecting tomorrow and having a tomorrow that I kind of work towards. And an addictive voice, tomorrow doesn't matter. Tomorrow is irrelevant. I just want to get high now. It's also a judging voice. It's very blaming and judging. And it judges, scans, assesses, and finds others wanting. It's a very, very negative voice in my head. And it's always blaming. I am never responsible for anything that I do when I am in the place of addiction. It is always somebody else's fault. That is the essential nature of addiction. Addiction defends itself with a wall of blame. It's also very labeling, and it labels me as bad, and it tells me that I deserve the abuse that I have received. The healthy voice is the opposite of all of that. The opposite voice is connected to other people and cares about my future and is a compassionate voice and has some wisdom to its understanding of how the world works. So when we walk the path of recovery, the first thing that we need to do is recognize that we just have this voice in our heads. And it's okay. It's not right, it's not wrong, it's just there. It's part of our internal drama. So the first step is recognition of it. And then inevitably, when I'm talking to somebody about their understanding of what's happening in their head, there's the recognition, yeah, I got this addictive voice, I can see it now. And then inevitably, the person says to me, how do I kill it? And the answer is we don't. We never try to kill a part of ourselves, never. What we do is we recognize it, watch it with some interest, but don't put any energy into it. Put energy into the healthy voice, where the healthy voice gets a chance to grow. Internal voices are like biceps. The more we exercise them, the stronger they get. The more we exercise a bicep, the bigger it gets and the stronger it gets. The more we exercise our addictive voice, the stronger it gets. The more we exercise our healthy voice, the stronger it gets. So our goal is not to exercise our addictive voice, it's to exercise our healthy voice. So it's not about fighting. It's not about doing an internal battle. It's about gracefully acknowledging that we have this part of our brains that isn't working very well for us, and it's okay as we build internal peace and compassion. And it's got something to do with self-acceptance. When I look at my own internal drama, and quite frankly, I've got all kinds of stuff going on in my head that I find kind of weird every once in a while. I have thoughts that flick by my head, and I go, where did that come from? And when I do that, I just sort of say, okay, that's part of who I am. That's just the stuff in my head. And it's okay. It's not about being right or wrong or bad or good. It's just weird stuff that I think every once in a while. And often it has nothing to do with my behavior at all. It's just kind of stuff that we think. Feelings. Feelings are emotions. Now, when somebody walks into my office to talk about their feelings associated with addiction, it's usually about a whole lot of Kleenex. We buy Kleenex by the case. We get special discounts because we buy so much. People walk into our offices, and often it's a very painful experience. So what I do when somebody bursts into tears in my office is I hand them a Kleenex box. And what I say is, may your tears fall like raindrops on roses. It's okay. People are allowed to have all kinds of feelings in my office, and it's fine. I don't make feelings good. I don't make feelings bad. They just are. At the birth of my first baby, I'm a parent, I have 2 kids. At the birth of my first baby, I received this squealing, wet human being into my arms, and I did what all parents, I believe, do, is I looked for the off button. And it wasn't there. There's no off button. And I have learned as I've matured with my children that I just have to manage them. I can't turn them off. Feelings are the same way. There is no off button. We cannot turn them off. But what we can do is learn to manage them in a more constructive way. And it's got something to do with understanding, especially when we're in a place of addictions, anger, loss, despair, shame, guilt, meaningless, isolation, depression. There's all kinds of feelings that are associated with addiction. And we have to find a way of working our way through those feelings. Sometimes expressing them to people, sometimes keeping them to ourselves, sometimes kind of talking about them, sometimes not. Now, when you go to counseling school, you actually learn some stuff. It's kind of interesting. One of the things that you learn is to validate people's feelings. What does that mean? It means everybody's feelings are just fine and should be encouraged and allowed to be the way they are. But you know something? When you're working in the addictions field, it's not quite that simple. Because sometimes I actually invalidate some people's feelings. Now, what does that mean? It means if somebody's coming off a drug like Valium, a benzodiazepine, they will have a whole lot of feelings that has nothing to do with them. It doesn't matter who you are. If you take enough benzos, if you take enough Valium, you will experience anxiety. And it doesn't mean that you have any underlying anxiety at all. It is created by the drug. And so understanding that when I'm working with somebody in my office, that sometimes what I get is feelings that are really based on who they are as a person, and sometimes they are feelings that are just caused by the drugs. The drugs are creating this, and it's got nothing to do with the person at all, because everybody who took this drug would have the same feeling. So it's completely independent of the person. So some thoughtfulness about understanding feelings is really important. So when we recover, the process of recovery from feelings is basically finding a constructive context for pain. Because often what people bring to my office is painful feelings. And I allow that to happen. And I just allow people to have the feelings that they need to have in order to move forward. So it's not about stomping on feelings or yelling and screaming our feelings. It's about how do I work with this feeling in a way that works for both myself and the other people around me. Now, it's also sometimes about finding completely healthy ways to get high. I am an addict. In fact, I'm going to even tell you what I'm addicted to. I'm addicted to the grouse grind. I do it all the time. I did it twice this weekend. I know what you're thinking.
What's the grouse grind?
The grouse grind is a path, a trail, a staircase on the North Shore that's the equivalent of running up a 300-story building, up the stairs. I just love it. And I produce a whole lot of feelings when I do that experience. And so that is a constructive way of getting high. So exercise is a positive, constructive way of generating feelings that work for all of us. And there's also something about developing emotional wisdom, understanding how people's feelings work between people. When is this feeling okay and when is it not okay? And how do I express it? How do I work with it, given the fact that I'm in relationship with all kinds of people in this world? Actions are also changed dramatically when I walk the path of addiction. In fact, I had a client once who, with great sincerity, integrity, and honesty, told me that his life was all about lying, cheating, and stealing. Lying, cheating, and stealing. That was his actions. When he wasn't lying, he was cheating. When he wasn't cheating, he was stealing. And when he wasn't stealing, he was lying. That's how he defined himself. And it was an interesting conversation I had with him, because what I said to him is, in this moment, with me, right here and now, you're not lying, you're not cheating, and you're not stealing. And he said, yes. And I said, how does that feel? And he said, it feels really good. And we kind of built his recovery plan based on that. Because when he actually didn't lie, cheat, and steal, he actually felt pretty good about the whole process. And it took us a long while to kind of work that through. But he had to change his actions. He couldn't keep walking the path of recovery and keep lying, cheating, and stealing. He had to figure out a different way of being in this world. We also have to work with the substances. We have changed our bodies and our brains with the substances, and we need to work with the reality of that. That's part of our actions. We need to change our playgrounds, our playmates, and our playthings. Playgrounds are where we hang out. Playmates are who we hang out with. And playthings are the objects in our lives. So we need to change those as part of our actions. And at the end of the day, we need to stop all those behaviors that were addictive for us. In that case, my client had to stop the lying, the cheating, and the stealing. It just wasn't going to work for him anymore. So, given that we as a human species need each other, given that we have to have contact with a fellow human being, understanding that is really useful. Because addiction breaks our relationships. Addiction is destructive to our relationships and the people around us. So the way I describe that is addiction is an attachment disorder. Now, I mean two things by that. I mean, when we walk the path of addiction, we wind up disconnecting from others. We disconnect from friends who don't use the same drugs in the same way we do. We disconnect from neighbors. We disconnect from family. We become more and more isolated as we walk the path of addiction. And if I also have been raised in an environment where I was not taught to bond and connect and attach and be with other people in a positive way, if I have that in my adult life, then what will happen for me is I will have a vulnerability to addictions. So addictions and disconnection from others is circular, and it goes round and round and round and round and round. So addiction is often about aggression and conflict, but sometimes it's about isolation and loneliness. And so the path of recovery is essentially we need to connect with others. We do not recover alone. We connect with others as a part of our recovery process. So how does that look like? It usually looks like showing up to a group or talking to a fellow human being and being honest and actually starting to talk about what our life is like. This is what it's like for me. And just sort of reflecting on what my day-to-day life is like. And as I do that, I will feel better. That process of sharing who I am with a concerned, caring, supportive human being is half of the process of a relationship. The other half is being there for others. So in a group, I spend some time speaking and sometimes listening. And as I listen to others and I hear what's going on for their own lives, then I have a sense that this recovery process that I'm doing is important. What we are doing together is building our recovery. It's not just my recovery anymore. It's something we share. It is our recovery process that we develop, and we do it in context with others. We are not alone. And we can't be alone. It won't work if we go off and do it in the bathroom. It doesn't work. Recovery is something we do with others. So it's also about developing trust. So trust is really important to the recovery process, because as we develop trust in others, we form good relationships. Trust is the foundation of a healthy relationship. In order to trust a fellow human being, a couple of things have to be in place. One thing is we need to become predictable with others. Trust and predictability go together. If you cannot predict somebody's behavior, you would not be wise to trust them. As you learn to predict them, you can build a relationship of trust. But it's more than just predictability. It also has to be about safety. And it has to have something to do with honesty. So those elements of predictability, honesty, and safety come together to create trust. Now, trust doesn't happen immediately. It would be very unwise to trust a human being who you've just met. Trust builds slowly. And it builds slowly as you learn who the other person is and you learn to predict them. And when that happens, you then have a trusting relationship. Trust is an interesting experience because it builds very slowly, but it can be destroyed in an instant. If any one of those becomes not true anymore, if you are not predictable and you do not create safety for somebody, trust will be destroyed. It can be rebuilt, but it takes a long time to rebuild. Recovery also has something to do with forgiveness, but it also starts with me forgiving myself. Because if I've walked the path of recovery long enough, I will have hurt other people around me. I will have taken care of my addiction and hurt the other people in my life. And so somewhere in there, I need to deal with that and essentially forgive myself and ask others for forgiveness as well, and actually talk about the relationships that I've had with people historically. Because I like images, I'm going to show you some images that walk this path with us. When I reflect deeply on who I am in this world, be I male or be I female, and I see myself in the mirrors of other people's eyes, that's a whole lot better than seeing myself in the mirror of a beer glass. Because other people who are carefully selected can help me to evolve, grow, and change. Now, I have an interesting job. I do many things. And one of the things that I do is I hire staff. And I had a counselor that I was interviewing once, and I asked her how she saw her job. And what she said to me is very simple. She said, I am the mirror that reflects hope, inspiration, and the human spirit. I'm going to say that again because it's so beautiful. She saw her job as being the mirror that reflects hope, inspiration, and the human spirit. I hired her on the spot. And she's fabulous. She completely understands how to be with people in a way of compassion. So the environment is also important. It's not just the people around us, but the environment is important. And as I said, if I'm living in a hotel room with a half an inch of cigarette butts on the floor, I have an addiction problem. That environment will reflect addiction to me. I need to clean up my space in order for me to be in the recovery process. I need to wash the walls. I need to do what it needs to do to reflect myself as a way of being okay. So it comes down to a number of things. One is about engagement of services. It's connecting with others who can help me. It's about looking at where I live. Where do I spend my nights? Where do I sleep at night? And looking at the room really closely and saying, this needs to reflect my healing. How can I put a picture on the wall that reflects who I would like to be? Sometimes it's about school. Sometimes it's about work. Sometimes it's about volunteering. It's about getting out and helping other people. How can I value myself by helping others. And the more I help others, the more I will see myself as having value. Another conversation I had with a client once, I was talking to him about this kind of issues, and I suggested that he go to a meeting, an AA meeting, and he go early and help people put out the chairs. And we had a really interesting discussion because he said to me, I couldn't do that. And I said, why not? And we chased that back and forth for a while, and it eventually came down to he couldn't do that because he felt if he walked in the door to offer that, he would be rejected. People wouldn't like him, and he'd been rejected all of his life. And I said, well, why don't you try it? Why don't you go and help people put out the chairs in this meeting and see what people say? And then come back and tell me. And he did. And he was shocked and surprised because he wasn't rejected. Somebody walked over to him at the end and said, thank you. And he felt really good about himself because he had helped and he had been seen to be helping. He was appreciated. And he felt good about himself as he walked out the door because he had offered something to somebody else and they had valued him in that process. It was important. So it's about choosing where I live and how I spend my time in a way that gets me valued by the environment that I am in. Spirituality. When I walk the path of addictions, my spirituality gets fried. I have no sense of meaning and purpose to life. My life becomes empty. It's this great walking vacuum. And I need to change that. So I need to fundamentally rethink my experience of how I get value in that. So recovery is about reconnecting, and it's becoming a larger person. What do I have to offer the world? Maybe it's carving totem poles, maybe it's dancing, maybe it's just being a good friend, maybe it's being a good parent. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how I manifest my spirituality. But I have to believe that what I'm doing is important. And sometimes it's just having a conversation with somebody where I listen to them and they feel heard by me. That can be a spiritual experience. So it's interesting to look at humanity, because really what we have on the surface is our actions. We can look at each other and we can see our actions and we can see what each other are doing. Underneath our actions, we have thoughts and feelings. We have that internal dialogue and we have emotions. But underneath that, we have our core beliefs as to who we are in this world. Now it's interesting, we can kind of see our actions. I know what I'm doing now, I'm waving my arms around. And we can see other people's actions. But we guess as to what people's thoughts and feelings are. In fact, to be absolutely honest with you, we guess at our own thoughts and feelings. I will say to myself, I know what I did yesterday, but what was I thinking? What was I feeling? Why did I do that? And I have to go back and try and figure out what it was, how I saw the world. What was I doing then? What was I thinking? What was I feeling that produced that action? Because I don't really get it. And we certainly spend a lot of time trying to figure out other people's thoughts and feelings because often people are a complete puzzle to us. We don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. And so we try to figure it out by saying, what is his thoughts? What is his feelings? And underneath that is our core beliefs. Who am I in this world? So let me give you an example. If a client is sitting in my office and he comes from a very violent heroin-addicted past, and I talk to him for a while, and I kind of talk to him about his feelings, and he talks about how angry he is. Okay, those are feelings. He's got lots of anger. And he talks about his thoughts, and his thoughts when he's in the place of addiction will often be about blame. And underneath that, he has a core belief that he is a bad person. He was told he was bad as a child, and now he's acting out bad in this world. So I think about what he needs to go through to change. Well, his actions need to be not about running around being violent and being addicted anymore. His feelings need to evolve. When he's not angry anymore, he needs to feel a sense of compassion, and he needs to start thinking about himself in a constructive way, that he has something to offer the world. And he needs to change his core belief from being a bad person to maybe being a good friend who actually cares about fellow human beings. Yeah. Now, what's interesting about this diagram, this image that you're looking at, is often people ask me, so I understand that this is who I am. I have who I believe I am in this world. I've got thoughts, I've got feelings, and then I act in a certain way. And I'd like to change that. Where do I start? And the answer is in the image that you're looking at here. If you look at the white arrows show you that they go in both directions. So what does that mean? It means it doesn't matter where you start. You can start in any one of those four places. You can say to yourself, I would just like to change my actions. I'm going to show up to a meeting tonight. That's my action. I'm just going to go to a meeting. I'm going to talk to these people. That's an action statement, and that's fine. Other people say, I'm just feeling so bad right now. Please pass me the Kleenex. I need to spend some time with tears. And that's fine as well. I pass the Kleenex. Other people say to me, I need to look at my thoughts. My thoughts are kind of driving me crazy. They're all over the place. And I'm blaming everybody else around me for stuff that I actually need to be thinking about in a different way. So blaming doesn't work for me, because that's all I ever do. And I say, let's talk about your addictive voice, and let's talk about a healthy voice and how it works. How can we build the healthy voice in you? Because blaming doesn't work. And other people say to me, fundamentally, I'm just a bad person. And I say, well, actually, you're not, because you wouldn't be having this conversation with me if that was true. You're actually exploring who you are, and you're open to change that by the fact we are having this conversation. So we are acting, thinking, feeling creatures with core beliefs that kind of drive who we are. And all of that can change, and all of that does change as we walk the path of recovery. I'm going to share you two more thoughts, and then we're going to take a break. So the first thought is just understanding how we work as people. We have a conscious mind, and we have an unconscious mind. Now I'm going to be really simple about how I'm going to define those two. Our conscious mind is everything we're thinking about right now. And our unconscious mind is everything else. And our conscious mind is always going back and forth interacting with our unconscious mind. So when I say to you, the color of your front door, what you have just done as I say that statement is you, in your conscious mind, you say, what's he doing? He's doing something kind of tricky. And then you go into your unconscious mind and you grab the image out of the filing cabinet of where you live, and you look at it in your mind. Remember we said thoughts are words and pictures? So you look at the picture of where you live. You then fine-tune the image to really see the front door, and then you label that with a color. And you grab that label and you pop it into your conscious mind. So you've gone and you've retrieved a piece of information from your unconscious mind, and you've dragged it and you put it into your conscious mind. That's how we work all the time. But it's a little more complicated than just retrieving information, because there's more stuff down there than just filing cabinets with images. What else is in our unconscious mind are tape loops. For example, if you learn to drive a bicycle, you will have a bicycle driving tape loop in your unconscious mind for the rest of your life. You never have to learn to drive a bicycle a second time. Once you've got driving a bicycle, it's down in your unconscious mind, and you can access it anytime you jump on a bicycle. And the tape loop that drives a bicycle will just take over, and you can do it 30 years after learning to drive a bicycle. Now let's look at how we develop a tape loop. For instance, we also often have car driving tape loops. So what does a car driving tape loop look like? Well, you slide in behind the wheel of a car, and you go through a very conscious exercise. You look at the knobs, and you look at the buttons, and you look at the stuff that's in front of you, and you slowly, one piece at a time, go through the exercise of figuring out, what does this knob do and what does this button do? And you flick them and you turn them, and you watch where the windshield wipers go like this when you turn this one, and the left and right turn signals go like this when you flip this other button. And then you look down at the floor and you see 3 pedals, and you only got 2 feet. And you go, oh my gosh, what do I do now? And so you go through a whole exercise of consciously figuring out how to drive a car, one little piece at a time, and then after a while, that process drops into our unconscious mind and becomes automatic. And a couple of years later, I haul out my keys, and I'm not thinking about driving a car at all. What I'm thinking about is lunch, and what am I going to do for the day? And I slide my key into the ignition without even noticing the key. And I just find the place in the ignition without having to look for it because my unconscious mind is finding that thing. And then I will drive out into traffic and I'm driving unconsciously. Sometimes, occasionally, it becomes very conscious when you go, oh my God, something's going wrong. And you bring your attention back. But mostly, if the traffic is painless and it's very easy as a driving thing, I'm going to work, I'm not thinking about driving. I'm thinking about lunch and what's on the radio and whatever else. I'm driving with an unconscious tape loop. It's something that drives my behavior that is not in my conscious mind at all. So, the big question that we have when we're dealing with addictions is, what do I do when now I have an unconscious tape loop that's destructive to me? How do I manage that? I've developed this unconscious tape loop, and now it's in my unconscious mind, and I don't know how to deal with it. Well, there is actually an answer to that. The answer is, if I think about my car driving tape loop, what do I do if I find that every time I get in my car, I smash it up? And I hurt myself or other people. So it becomes a destructive experience for me. Well, I start to ask myself, what else can I do? And maybe I decide that I can learn to drive a bus. So what I do is I slide behind the wheel of a bus. And I experience anxiety. It'll be a difficult, stressful thing. Because then I have to consciously develop a new tape loop. I have to say, what's this knob do? What's this button do? And how does this work? And I have to figure out slowly and painfully, with quite a bit of anxiety, how it is to drive a bus, because I got 30 feet of steel behind me. But if I do go through that process and I learn to drive a bus, and buses are safe for me, then I have a safe unconscious tape loop and an unsafe unconscious tape loop, and I get to pick which one I use. And I say, I don't want to be in a car anymore, so I don't get in the car. My unconscious tape loop is still there, and every once in a while I'll kind of notice it. It'll get fired up and I'll see it, but I can choose to let it become dormant. And what does dormant mean? It means it's still there, but I don't give it any energy anymore. I just let it sit there, and I don't pay it any attention. It's like a ghost in my head that kind of drifts through every once in a while, but it can make the flames flicker on the old castle. If you think about old castles and ghosts, it can kind of make the flames flicker, but it can't pick up the couch and throw it through the wall. That's what a dormant, unconscious tape loop feels like. I kind of notice it, but it doesn't grab me, because I'm putting all of my energy into my healthy tape loop, and I'm working hard at maintaining and working at that and strengthening that. Tape loops become stronger when we exercise them. And the more we exercise health, the stronger it gets. One last thought before we take a break. Addiction is maintained by the process of blaming. So understanding how we are when we are in the place of blaming is really important, because our recovery has to deal with that. So blaming is the wall that protects addiction. Nothing is my fault when I'm in the place of addiction. I will blame somebody or something else in order to justify the fact that I'm doing this obnoxious behavior. That's the way addiction is. So understanding blaming is really useful, and I'm going to use a psychological buzzword. And the psychological buzzword is called projection. Now, projection is when we see the stuff that's going on in our heads in the world around us. Let me give you a completely real-life experience of me projecting. This happened to me. I'm sitting in the barber chair, and I looked down at the white sheet in front of me, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Now, I bet you can guess what that was. It was gray hair. I had never seen gray hair before. Every time I looked at the barber sheet in front of me, I either saw blonde hair and then it kind of went brown hair. But it wasn't gray. So that shook a core belief that I have. I used to believe there were two types of people. There were the old folks who were born unlucky and the young folks who were born lucky. And I was a young folk and I was never going to get old. That was my core belief, is that I was young. And my core belief got shaken by the experience of seeing white hair. So it was a difficult moment in my life. It really was. And I walked out onto Broadway, and all I could see was gray-haired people walking down the street. They're all over the place. Now, there's two explanations for that. Either my friends knew I was going to have a revelation in the barber's chair, and they got all of their gray-haired friends to march up and down the barber store so that I would have this experience, or the second explanation is I was projecting. I had this internal drama going on in my head, and I saw it as happening outside of myself, and all I could see is gray-haired people. So we tend to see stuff that's going on in our heads outside of ourselves. And we do it all the time. So if I'm in the place of addiction and I have this addictive drama going on, I will see it as happening in my world around me and I will blame the world. That's just the way it works. And the opposite experience of projection is taking responsibility. The opposite of blaming is responsibility. When I actually say to myself, I am responsible for my life. What I do when my feet hit the floor of the bedroom in the morning determines the outcome of my day. I make decisions about what I do, and this is my life, it's nobody else's. When I adopt that as the framework, I am taking responsibility for who I am in this world. Yes, and it is my life, and I manage my life in the best way I possibly can. That's the essence of the word responsibility, which is the opposite of the word blaming. Blaming is about looking backwards. Responsibility is about looking forwards. What am I going to be tomorrow that makes my life better? In spite of our internal chaos, we always have a choice. And it's this choice that defines who we are. I'm going to say that again. Despite our internal chaos, and we all have internal chaos, in that chaos we also always have a choice. And it's the choice that defines who we are. Now this is my image that it's time for a break. But let's look at this image for a second. If I'm on the path of recovery or on the boat of recovery, and I'm going round and round and round in circles and I just can't seem to get to my recovery goals, then maybe I've got all the big muscular guys on one side of the boat and the tiny little guys on the other side of the boat. And what I need to do to get to my goals is I need to kind of mix them up a little bit. And then the boat will travel straight and I can get to where I want to go. So welcome back, everybody, to our open public education series, session number 3 on recovery. So because I like cartoons and images and jokes, here's a joke. Nothing is my fault. My family is dysfunctional and my parents won't empower me. Consequently, I'm not self-actualized. My behavior is addictive functioning in a disease process of toxic codependency. I need holistic healing and wellness before I will accept any responsibility for my actions. One of us needs to stick his head in a bucket of ice water. I love the culture of victimhood. Yes, that says a lot. Calvin and Hobbes, I always find funny. So I want to talk about recovery as well. So when we talked last week about our experience with drugs, we talked about withdrawal. And we talked about when we stop taking a drug, we will experience the opposite of what the main effect of the drug was. If we experience elation with a drug that's a stimulant, we will experience depression when we stop taking it. So that's the immediate withdrawal symptoms. But something happens after that. So I love buzzwords here. Here's a buzzword. Post-acute withdrawal. What does that mean? Post means after, and acute means short-term. It's the opposite of chronic, which is long-term. So what this slide actually says is what happens after the short-term withdrawal. Now, why don't they just say that? After the short-term withdrawal, they don't. They love buzzwords. So therefore, we talk about post-acute withdrawal. So after we're finished getting really sick, and we go back to our lives, things still don't work for us very well. We tend to experience depression, difficulty thinking clearly, managing emotions doesn't work very well for us, memory problems, problems of sleeping, difficulty overcoming and managing stress, and difficulty with coordination. So learning to understand that that is a temporary state, that does not go on forever. It takes a while to kind of work that through, but essentially we need to give ourselves some time to allow this process to go through, because essentially we have unbalanced our brain by taking all these drugs. If we smoke enough crack cocaine, we will have depression, and we'll have it for quite a while. And then it will lift and it will go away and we'll be fine again. But understanding that is important, because it can be really difficult for me when I'm in this place, because life just doesn't work very well, and I need to be patient with myself, because this stuff will naturally heal itself. Now, there are things that I can do to help it heal itself. Examples being our bodies. The human body was meant to move. The human body was not meant to lie or sit still. We are active creatures. So even walking around the block is a good thing to do. So activity is important for the human body and, quite frankly, the human brain. And if we do not exercise, things go wrong. Now, I'm a little bit extreme on this because I run up mountains, but it doesn't matter what we do. And literally getting off the bus a couple of stops early and walking quickly to our destination is exercise. Taking the stairs, not taking the elevator is exercise. Walking around the block is exercise. When I move my body, things work better for me than if I don't move my body. The human body was not designed to be still. It was designed to be in motion. Relaxation is actually something I can consciously do. It's called meditation. If I slow my brain down and I repeat something, the word calm, in my mind often enough, I will become more relaxed. The antidote for anxiety is relaxation. And so learning how to repeat calming things to myself are really important. When we do therapy with people and we work on things like past trauma, we never do it without building a container first. What does that mean? It means I need to learn how to manage some feelings first. I need to know how to self-soothe myself. I need to be able to repeat calming influences to myself to allow myself to experience myself more fully. Spirituality, I need to have a sense that this is important and find a way of doing that. It's also about working with caffeine and sugar. So often I have an individual that I work with, and they come with all kinds of drugs. They come with chemical soup. And then I will work with them, and they'll stop taking the drugs. But then what they're taking is caffeine and sugar. They're drinking 6 cups of coffee, 10 cups of coffee, 20 cups of coffee a day, and they're taking sugar like I don't believe. Those are destabilizing. They do not help people when we take a lot of caffeine and sugar. So understanding the importance of what we put in our mouths is actually really important. So nutrition is the buzzword. Now, I've seen a lot of images for nutrition in this world, and I have one that I really like, and it's this. Now, I have this as a plastic fridge magnet on my fridge. This is how we should eat. When we look at our plate, what we should see is mostly vegetables. And we should have a little bit of starch, which is rice and potatoes and pasta. And we should have a little bit of protein, which is meat and beans and lentils. But mostly it should be vegetables. When I have a dinner at my house, what I do is I take this plastic fridge magnet and I put it in the center of my table with my kids. And I say, look at what's on your plate. Look at what's on this plate. And you tell me what the starch, what the protein, and what the vegetables are. Point them out to me. And tell me if I got the balance right. Now, I will be honest. I don't usually have 50% vegetables. But certainly, we should. And mostly when I eat lunches, I eat this huge carrot every day for lunch. It's huge. I go out and buy it up at the local store, and it's a really big plate of vegetables, one big carrot. So eating lots of really good food is actually a good diet. So figuring out what to eat is really, really important. And if you have one image for what's to eat, that's it. Now, one of the things that we need to do when we're in the path of recovery is called identifying our triggers. Now, identifying our triggers means understanding that the world around us will have an impact on us. We are not alone. We do not live our lives in isolation. So we need to manage our environment to make our world okay. So a trigger is something that makes me kind of want to use. It's kind of like, oh my God, I feel anxious when I'm having this experience. So I need to go through what's called a trigger checklist. And by that I mean, I need to look at the activities that put me at risk? What can I do? What can't I do? Where do I need to avoid? What are the people that will want me to use? If I go back to my old drinking buddies and I say to them, I've just been to a couple of AA meetings and I really like going to AA. I think it's a good path for me. I know what my buddies are going to say. They are going to say, great idea. Let's drink to that. I'll buy the first round. My drinking buddies will not want me to be on the path of recovery, and that's for a couple of different reasons. One is, I am holding up a mirror to them that they do not want to look in. They do not want to see me talking about recovery because just perhaps they have a problem themselves. And the other thing I'm actually telling them is perhaps they need to reflect a little bit on who they are. And they're about to lose me as a friend. And they like me in the room, and they know that if I go to AA long enough, I'm not going to be hanging out with them anymore. So they don't like looking in the mirror, and they don't like the idea of losing me as a friend, so they will try and get me to drink, inevitably. So I need to think about the people in my life and make a plan for that. I need to think about the places that I go. There are some neighborhoods in this city that I can't go to because they're just not okay for me, because they're just associated with my use. There are some times that are not okay for me. Maybe a day, a week, a month. There are anniversaries. There are paydays. There are whatever. The times that I need to be careful around and make a plan for. There are some mental or emotional states that I need to be thoughtful about. Maybe I get into a place of anger. I need to figure out how I'm going to deal with anger. How do I deal with that in a way that doesn't get me to use? Maybe there are events that happen. Every time this event happens, I know it's a big problem. New Year's Eve comes rolling around and I'm going to get drunk. Maybe I need to plan on doing something else on New Year's Eve. And maybe it's the objects in my life. I get awfully bonded to the crack pipe, the beer glass, and the needle. I get awfully connected to those objects. They become important to me. Now it's interesting, if I think about what we as a human species do when we are losing a loved one. It's called a ritual, and the ritual is called a funeral. So how we let go of someone in our lives who has died is a ritualistic process called a funeral. So perhaps we need to have a funeral for the pipe, or a funeral for the beer glass. And what we need to do is ritualistically acknowledge that this object is not in my life anymore, because I get awfully connected to these objects, and they become important to me when I'm using. And letting go of them is going to be important in my process of recovery. If I have a relapse, I've been sober for a while, and then I stop, and then I start to use again, I need to be thoughtful about how I learn the lesson from that experience, because learning the relapse lessons are important in the journey of recovery. So I need to ask myself some questions if I've had a relapse. First of all, I need to make a lapse, which is a short-term use, not be an excuse for a relapse, which is diving back into the big black pit. I need to be able to reflect on what got me into that trouble. I need to know what triggered me. How do I avoid that in the future? How can I think differently about this? How can I do different actions? How can I manage this in a different way? I need to reflect on my relapse and think to myself, how am I stronger and wiser now that I've had that experience to avoid it in the future? Now, there are stages of recovery. And the stages of recovery are early recovery, middle recovery, and late recovery. So in early recovery, I tend to be making very concrete changes to my lifestyle. And I'm thinking about eating right and diet and exercise. I'm talking about and thinking about the basics and trying to structure that so I'm physically healthy. And I'm also staying away from the people that will pull me back in if they possibly can. And I'm building support. I'm trying to figure out who I can connect with, who will help me to build this new life. And I'm understanding what the problem is. I'm trying to get some education to help me figure out what went wrong and what I'm going to do differently. In the middle stage of recovery, it's not really about using anymore, because I've kind of now had some time under my belt and I'm feeling more comfortable not using. And I'm able to put my energy into family, work, relationships, and friendships. And I'm developing support and strengthening my relationships with people and developing friends and learning to talk to people in a way that includes both me and them. I'm developing my social skills. I'm learning stress management skills. I'm learning to manage anxiety. I'm learning to relax and slow myself down. And I'm learning to be, quite frankly, a better friend for people. In late recovery, where I've been doing it for quite a while now, I might be willing to work on some early childhood issues, things that didn't work for me, angers that I have from the past. Perhaps I'll reach out and help others, because now I have something to offer the world. And I can see where you are, because I was with you once. I understand where you're standing, because that's where I stood once. I now have something to offer. I have some wisdom of experience now in recovery, and I can reach out and I can say, welcome. I was where you are now, once. And I can guarantee you that it gets better. It's really difficult at first. And you know something, as you walk the path, the whole thing does get a little easier. So those are the 3 stages of recovery: early, middle, and late. What I said when I started this is I was going to start with a poem, and I'm going to end with a poem. So I'd like to share with you what I think is an absolutely beautiful poem. An old First Nations chief and his grandson sat in the shade of an oak, staring at the river down below. The old man was unusually quiet this day. Softly the boy asked, "Why do you sit so silent and thoughtful, grandfather?" The old man turned slowly to explain. "2 wolves fight in my heart. One wolf is vengeful, angry, and violent. The other is forgiving, compassionate, and peaceful." The boy puzzled over this revelation for a long time, and finally he asked, "Which one is winning?" The old man answered, "The one I feed." Isn't that beautiful? Yes. Yes. I would like to thank you folks for participating with me in this 3rd presentation. But if you have any questions, comments, now is the time that we can talk. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.